Alien girl hid in the human's barn after the storm. He never expected her to trust him first. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The storm had passed only an hour before Ethan Cole stepped out into the dim, silver-washed night. The clouds still hung heavy, dragging low across the sky like they hadn't decided whether to leave or strike again. His barn sat at the edge of the property, its wooden panels slick with leftover rain, the faint smell of wet hay drifting through the gaps. Ethan pushed the door open slowly, the old hinges letting out a tired creak. His flashlight cut through the dark in a thin, shaky beam. He muttered to himself about checking for leaks, about the roof that needed patching, about the fence he'd have to rebuild after the wind tore half of it loose. Normal problems. Familiar ones. But as he took another step inside, the air shifted. A soft scrape. A quick inhale that wasn't his. Ethan froze. The beam of his flashlight slid across scattered hay, a toppled bucket, then something pale. No, someone. Crouched between two bales, huddled tight, was a girl. Not human. Her skin shimmered faintly, a soft blue-silver that caught the light like moonlit water. Her hair clung to her cheeks, damp from the storm, and her eyes, large, luminous, unblinking, watched his every move. Ethan slowly lowered the flashlight so it wouldn't shine in her face. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you." She flinched anyway, shoulders tightening, breath catching as if even sound pressed too hard against her. Ethan raised both hands, palms open. A simple gesture. Universal, he hoped. Rain dripped from the edge of the roof, tapping a slow rhythm on the metal feed bin. The barn smelled like wet wood and mud. The night felt too quiet, as though even the wind held its breath. "You're cold," Ethan said softly. "Hold on." He backed, away a step at a time, careful not to make sudden movements, and reached for an old quilt hanging by the door. Faded colors, frayed edges, but warm. Reliable. He set it on the ground halfway between them and nudged it gently with his boot. "For you," he said. No pressure, no demand, just an offering. The girl's eyes flicked from him to the quilt and back again. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't move closer. Ethan didn't expect her to. Trust wasn't something that appeared in an instant, especially not after a storm nasty enough to send her hiding in a stranger's barn. He stepped back again, giving her space, letting the silence stretch until it softened instead of scared. Outside, the last raindrops slipped off the eaves. Inside, in the dim warmth of the barn, something small but real began to shift between them, as gentle as a first breath after fear. The girl did not reach for the quilt, but Ethan could see the shiver running through her shoulders, a small tremble she was trying to hide. The flashlight rested in his hand, its beam angled toward the floor so the barn stayed soft and shadowed. He could feel the dampness in the air settling on his jacket, the leftover chill from the storm still clinging to everything. He kept his voice calm, steady, the way someone speaks to a frightened animal that is not really an animal at all. "I will stay over here," he said, easing himself down onto an overturned feed bucket. The metal was cold even through his jeans, and he let out a quiet breath as he set the flashlight beside him so it created a dim halo on the barn floor instead of a sharp beam. The girl shifted slightly, not toward him, but not farther away either. Her eyes reflected the light like polished glass, unblinking, assessing him with cautious calculation. Ethan pulled off his soaked gloves and rubbed his hands together for warmth. The barn creaked as it settled, old wood adjusting after the storm. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, the last sigh of a system that had torn through the valley only hours earlier. "You picked a rough night to be out in that," he murmured. He did not expect an answer. Still, something flickered in her expression. A tiny reaction, a recognition of sound. Maybe tone, maybe just the absence of threat. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small thermos. "It is just warm water," he said, unscrewing the lid so she could see. He poured a little into the cup and set it down near the quilt, leaving a wide gap between them. Steam curled upward in a slow, gentle ribbon. The girl watched it like it was a living thing. Ethan eased back again, hands resting on his knees, the distance between them clear and intentional. The barn hummed with the quiet noises of animals settling after the storm, the soft rustle of hay, the faint whistle of wind through a small gap near the rafters. After a long moment, the girl extended one hand. Her fingers were slender, a faint silver sheen catching the weak light. She touched the edge of the quilt, testing its texture, then pulled it closer with a hesitant tug. Ethan did not move. He barely breathed. She wrapped the quilt around her shoulders, the fabric swallowing her almost completely. Only her eyes remained visible, bright and alert above the folds. "There you go," Ethan said softly. She blinked once, slowly, almost like a nod. He felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he had not realized he was holding. Trust was not given fully, not yet, but a door had cracked open. Outside, the last raindrops finally stopped. The silence that followed felt different now, not empty, but waiting. Ethan adjusted his weight on the bucket, careful not to scrape it against the floor. "I will stay right here," he said quietly. "You rest. You are safe for now." The girl's eyes softened, just a fraction, and she lowered her head into the quilt, her breathing steadying as the barn settled into the quiet rhythm of a night that was no longer dangerous, only uncertain and new. The night thinned into the pale gray of early morning before either of them moved again. Ethan felt the stiffness settle into his back from sitting on the feed bucket too long, but he did not shift until he saw the girl stir beneath the quilt. Her breathing had steadied sometime during the night, soft and even, a quiet contrast to the restless wind outside. A thin beam of sunlight pushed through a crack in the barn wall, landing across her shoulder in a faint stripe of gold. The light made her skin glow softly, like frost catching the morning. Ethan cleared his throat gently, careful not to startle her. "Morning," he said, keeping his tone low. "Sun is coming up. Storm looks like it finally broke." The girl lifted her head slightly from the quilt, her eyes blinking as if the light itself was unfamiliar. She looked toward the small window above them, watching the soft wash of dawn. Something in her posture shifted, a slow easing of tension, like she was letting the night roll off her shoulders. Ethan reached for the thermos again and poured another small measure of warm water. The steam curled upward, catching the early light. He set it down in the same place as before, giving her the same amount of space. She watched him do it, her gaze steady but not as guarded as it had been. After a few seconds, she reached out, pulled the cup toward her, and took a careful sip. Ethan let out a quiet breath he had not realized he was holding. "That is good," he murmured. "You must have been out there a while." She lowered the cup, her fingers wrapped delicately around it, as though it were a fragile thing. Her gaze drifted over the barn, taking in the tools hanging on the wall, the faint dust in the air, the horses shifting softly in their stalls. Everything about her expression suggested calculation, but not fear. Curiosity, maybe. A small step forward. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "My name is Ethan," he said, tapping his chest once in case she needed the gesture. "Ethan Cole." The girl blinked, then touched her own chest lightly, the quilt slipping just enough for him to see the faint shimmer of her skin beneath. "Leary." Her voice was soft, airy, the syllables rolling like a whisper of wind. Ethan nodded slowly. "Leary," he repeated, careful with the sound. She watched him say it, her eyes narrowing slightly as if evaluating whether he had done it correctly. When she gave the smallest nod, he felt a warm flicker of relief. She shifted again, pulling the quilt tighter. Ethan stood and moved toward the barn door, not to leave, but to check the latch. The morning breeze pushed lightly against it. He secured the wooden bar across the inside of the door, making sure it held. When he turned back, Leary was watching him with a new expression, something searching, something that asked a question without using words. He lifted his hand slightly. "It is just to keep the wind out," he said. "Nothing more." Her gaze softened. Outside, the sun climbed another inch above the horizon. Inside, in the quiet of the barn, trust edged one breath closer. Morning settled into the kind of calm that only comes after a long night, the barn warming slowly as sunlight crawled across the wooden floorboards. Ethan checked the horses, giving each a light pat, their steady breaths misting the cool air. Leary watched him from her place on the hay, still wrapped in the quilt, her eyes tracking every movement with quiet attention. There was no fear in her gaze now, just cautious curiosity. Ethan kept his steps slow, deliberate. "I need to fix the roof," he said, lifting a loose board to show the gap where rain had blown through. He pointed upward toward the beams, and then toward the dripping corner. She seemed to study the gesture more than his words. Then, surprising him, she stood. The quilt slipped around her shoulders as she moved, the soft sheen of her skin catching the morning light. Ethan raised a hand gently. "Easy," he said, though she did not seem unsteady. She stepped closer to the leaking section and tilted her head, examining it. A faint glow rippled beneath the surface of her skin, like shifting light underwater. Ethan blinked, unsure if it was a trick of the sun, but the glow faded before he could say anything. Leary reached toward the damaged beam, then paused and looked back at him as if asking permission. Ethan nodded slowly. "Go ahead." She pressed her palm lightly to the beam. Nothing dramatic happened, but she closed her eyes, brow tightening in quiet concentration. Ethan waited, listening to the small sounds of the barn, the flutter of dust in the sunlight, the soft shuffle of horses adjusting their weight. When she stepped back, he touched the beam. Still wet from the storm. Nothing repaired. But that was not the point. She had tried. She had offered something of herself. Ethan gave her a small smile. "Thank you," he said. "That helps." She blinked at him, as though the idea of gratitude was unfamiliar. Then she lowered her gaze, the quilt slipping a little as she tightened it around her shoulders. Ethan moved to grab a ladder from the wall. When he did, she stepped back, startled by the sudden scrape of metal. He stopped instantly. "It is just a ladder," he said softly. "Nothing harmful." She studied the tool, then gave a tiny nod. Ethan climbed it carefully, pulling a tarp over the damaged section of the roof. Sunlight filtered through dust motes as he worked, the morning breeze flowing gently through the cracks. Below him, Leary walked a slow circle around the barn interior, her fingers brushing lightly against the wooden walls, the hay, the handles of tools she did not recognize. It was the kind of exploration someone made when they were trying to understand a place, not escape from it. When Ethan climbed down, she stood waiting, her eyes meeting his with a question he finally understood. "You are wondering why I am helping," he said. She did not speak, but her gaze held steady. Ethan set the ladder aside and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Because you were cold. Because you were scared. Because you needed somewhere safe to rest." Leary looked at him for a long moment, the barn quiet around them, the morning light drawing soft lines across her face. Her hand lifted, hesitant but intentional, touching the quilt as if reminding herself of the warmth he had given her. Trust was building, slow and careful, like sunlight spreading across the barn floor 1 inch at a time. The morning stretched into a soft, quiet afternoon, the kind that made the fields outside shimmer under a thin veil of leftover moisture. Ethan opened the barn door just wide enough to let in a line of fresh air, careful not to expose the inside too much. Leary stood a few feet back, watching the shift in light with the same alert stillness she had carried since he first found her. She held the quilt close, though the day was warming. "It is safe," Ethan said gently. "No one comes out this way unless they need hay or help with equipment. You are fine." She stepped closer to the doorway but did not cross the threshold, her eyes adjusting to the brightness. The fields, wide and open, seemed to overwhelm her. Ethan could see it in the way her breath caught, as though too much space was its own kind of danger. He stepped beside her but kept a respectful distance. "It is just open land," he said. "Nothing hiding out there." She glanced up at him, studying his face as if to judge the truth of his words. Then she reached one hand toward the sunlight, letting it wash over her fingers. The soft blue silver of her skin brightened under the glow. Ethan felt a quiet awe settle in his chest, the same kind he felt when dawn first touched the horizon. He stepped back, giving her room. Leary took one careful step outside, the grass brushing her bare feet. She inhaled slowly, her posture loosening. For a few seconds, she simply stood there, feeling the earth breathe. Ethan watched silently, not wanting to break the moment. When she turned back to him, there was something new in her eyes, something lighter. She re-entered the barn with slow steps, as if returning to a shelter that now felt familiar. Ethan offered her a clean towel and a soft flannel shirt he had found in a storage chest. "You must be uncomfortable in wet clothes," he said, gesturing toward a corner behind a stack of hay bales. You can change there. No one will see. She studied the shirt first, then the corner, then Ethan. He kept his gaze steady and respectful. After a moment, she nodded and slipped behind the hay. Ethan turned away completely, focusing on adjusting a saddle strap that did not need adjusting. When she re-emerged, the flannel was loose on her but warm, its sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She held her original clothing folded neatly in her hands. Ethan offered a small smile. Better. She touched the flannel lightly, then nodded. Her gaze drifted toward the horses. Drawn by curiosity, she stepped closer. One of the mares, a gentle brown named Maple, lowered her head to sniff Leary's hand. Leary froze at first, then let her fingers brush the mare's warm nose. Maple snorted softly, accepting her without hesitation. Leary's face softened, her shoulders relaxing as though the simple trust of an animal meant something deeper than words. Ethan watched with quiet satisfaction. She likes you, he said. Leary looked back at him, her expression thoughtful, almost fragile. Then she placed her palm gently on Maple's forehead, and for the first time since she arrived, her lips curved into a small, hesitant smile. It was the smallest thing, but in the hushed stillness of the barn, it felt like the beginning of something real. The quiet rhythm inside the barn settled into something steady, a calm that felt earned after the long night. Ethan checked the sky through the open doorway, noting the clear blue stretch and the warm sunlight spreading across the fields. It would be a dry day, a good day for repairs, maybe even for letting Leary breathe a little easier. She stood near Maple's stall, her hand resting lightly on the mare's neck, her posture relaxed but alert. The flannel shirt hung loosely on her frame, the sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hair drying into soft waves that framed her luminous blue-silver skin. Ethan approached slowly so she could track his movement. I need to head to the tool shed. It is just a short walk, he said. You can stay here. You will be safe. Her eyes followed the direction of his gesture toward the small building a short distance from the barn. She hesitated, then stepped closer to him, her expression shifting into something uncertain. You do not need to go, she said softly, her voice quiet but steady. The word surprised him. It was the first time she had offered anything resembling a request. Ethan shook his head gently. I will only be a minute. I need supplies to fix the fence and the roof. Leary looked down at her hands, her expression tightening with something like concern. Then she stepped forward, closing the space between them by a few feet, though she still kept a respectful distance. She touched her chest lightly. My people, we are taught that when someone leaves, danger follows. Ethan stilled, absorbing that. Her words carried weight, not just fear, but memory. Here, he said softly, leaving is normal. It does not mean anything bad. I will come back. She held his gaze for a long moment, searching his face for any sign that he did not mean it. When she found none, her shoulders loosened, and she stepped back, giving him permission to go. Ethan nodded once and walked toward the doorway, making sure his steps were calm, his pace steady. Halfway to the shed, he glanced back. Leary stood at the barn entrance, framed by sunlight, watching him with an intensity that felt like a quiet test. He lifted a hand in a small wave to show he was still aware of her. She responded by touching the edge of the flannel shirt, as if anchoring herself to something familiar. Ethan returned a moment later with a toolbox and a roll of weatherproof tape. Leary was exactly where he left her, standing in the same spot with her bare feet on the wooden threshold, as though stepping outside still felt too large a risk. When he approached, she moved aside to let him in, eyes flicking to the items he carried. Tools, he explained, lifting the box. To fix things. She reached out, fingers brushing the metal handle lightly, then pulling back as if testing the idea of how humans repaired their world. You mend what is broken, she said quietly. The words carried a thoughtful weight. Ethan smiled faintly. We try. Leary looked at him then, really looked, her eyes steady and searching. This is why your kind is different, she murmured. You fix what storms break. Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but the barn settled into a soft hush, the kind that made the moment feel delicate, almost sacred. Leary lowered her gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. We were never taught to stay after the storm. And in the stillness that followed, the distance between them felt smaller than it had ever been. The afternoon sun drifted lower, turning the fields a soft gold that spilled through the cracks in the barn walls. Ethan sorted through the toolbox, picking out nails and a small hammer, the kind of simple work that kept his hands busy and his mind steady. Leary watched from a few feet away, her posture thoughtful, as though she was trying to understand not just what he was doing, but why it mattered to him. The quiet between them felt different now, not cautious, but waiting for something to unfold. Ethan climbed the ladder again to secure the tarp more firmly along the damaged beam. He checked each corner, pulling the material tight and smoothing it down. As he worked, a soft hum rose in the barn, a vibration he had not heard before, like a distant tone that barely touched the air. He paused, listening. Leary's head lifted sharply, her eyes narrowing as she turned toward the open door. The hum deepened, faint but unmistakable, carrying a strange clarity that did not belong to the farm or the wind or anything earthly. Ethan climbed down slowly, keeping his movements calm, though a prickle of unease crawled across the back of his neck. "What is that?" he asked quietly. Leary stepped toward the doorway, stopping just short of the sunlight. Her expression tightened with something more than fear, something closer to recognition. "A search pulse," she whispered. "It is how my people track what they have lost." Ethan felt his stomach drop. "They are looking for you." She nodded once, her eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the fields. "The pulse will pass over this place soon. It will scan for life signatures. If it finds me—" She did not finish the sentence, but Ethan understood. He set the hammer down and moved to the barn doors, pushing one halfway shut to dim the light spilling into the interior. Dust drifted lazily through the narrowing beam. "Come inside," he said gently, away from the opening. Leary hesitated, her hands tightening on the edge of the flannel shirt. "If I stay here, you could be marked with me." "Then I will take that chance," Ethan answered, not even needing to think. She stared at him, startled by how easily he said it. He motioned her deeper into the barn, guiding her toward the shadows between the hay bales. The hum grew louder, a soft pulse that shimmered through the wooden beams. Ethan could feel the vibration settle into the floor, like a quiet heartbeat beneath his boots. "Stay low," he murmured. She crouched behind the bales, her eyes luminous in the dim light, her breath steady but tight with apprehension. Ethan pulled the barn doors nearly shut, leaving only a thin crack for air. The pulse washed over the barn, a gentle fluctuation of sound and air pressure. Leary lowered her head, waiting. Ethan stayed by the door, shielding her with his presence even though he did not fully understand what he was protecting her from. The hum faded slowly, dissolving into the stillness of the afternoon. Leary exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing only slightly. She looked at Ethan with an expression that carried awe, confusion, and something close to disbelief. "You stayed," she whispered. Ethan nodded once. "Of course I stayed." And in that quiet moment, the distance between their worlds felt smaller than ever. The pulse left a faint stillness behind it, a thin quiet that settled over the barn like dust after a long breath. Ethan waited another moment, listening for any echo of the strange hum. But the world outside remained calm, the fields unmoving under the soft afternoon light. He let the barn door rest in place, not fully open, not fully closed, just enough to let a narrow line of sunlight stretch across the floorboards. In the shadows between the hay bales, Leary slowly lifted her head. Her eyes, bright even in dim light, searched the air as if confirming that the danger had passed. When she finally stood, the quilt slipping from her shoulders, Ethan could see the trembling in her hands, not from fear alone, but from the weight of something heavier. "They did not find you," he said softly. "You are safe for now." Leary stepped out from the shadows, her gaze drifting toward the thin beam of sunlight that cut through the barn. She touched the air just inside it, almost like testing its warmth. "The search pulse does not give second chances," she murmured. "If they detected me, I would have been taken." Ethan heard what she did not say. Taken back. Taken away. Taken somewhere he could not imagine. "But they did not," he said, and his voice came out steadier than he expected. "You were hidden. They missed you." Leary looked at him then, really looked, her expression shifting with a quiet intensity. "Because of you," she said. "You shielded the doorway. You stayed near me." Ethan shrugged lightly, though his chest tightened at the truth of her words. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Leary said, the word gentle but firm. "Not anyone." She stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate, like each step was a decision. Her gaze studied him, searching for something she had not yet named. You risked being marked, she continued softly. Your kind does not understand the consequences, but you felt them. You knew something was wrong. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, a faint warmth rising under his collar. I could tell you were scared. That was enough. Leary tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful, cautious, almost as if she was about to reveal something she had kept hidden for far too long. Where I come from, she said, fear is not something others share. It is something carried alone. Admitting it is considered weakness. Trusting someone with it is unthinkable. Ethan did not interrupt. He let her speak, let the silence hold the shape of her words. But you, Leary paused, her voice softening into something fragile. You treated my fear as if it mattered. As if I mattered. The barn felt warmer than before, the sunlight stretching another inch across the floor. Ethan took a slow breath, grounding himself in the simplicity of the moment. You do matter, he said. Storm or no storm. Leary closed her eyes for a heartbeat, the flannel shirt shifting gently as she exhaled. When she opened them again, something had changed, an openness, a clarity, a fragile trust taking its first full breath. She stepped forward and placed her hand lightly over the center of her chest, where her heartbeat shimmered faintly beneath her skin. Ethan, she said quietly, there is something you need to know about me, something I have not told you. The barn held still, waiting with them, as the truth gathered on her tongue like the first drop of rain before a new storm. For a moment, Leary stood perfectly still, the barn holding its breath with her. Dust drifted lazily in the stripe of sunlight between them, turning in slow circles as if time itself had softened. Ethan waited, hands relaxed at his sides, sensing the weight of what she was about to say. She drew in a steady breath, her eyes luminous, her voice barely above a whisper. I am not simply lost, she murmured. I am not a traveler who wandered too far. She touched her chest again, fingers brushing the faint glow beneath her skin. I am a bearer, a communicator. My people call it the one who remembers. I carry knowledge that is not meant to be found by those who sent the search pulse. Ethan felt something shift inside him, not fear, but concern, grounded and quiet. Leary, he said softly, you can tell me whatever you need to tell me. She stepped closer, her voice trembling with honesty more than fear. If they take me back, everything I hold becomes theirs. My memories, my experiences, even this. She motioned around them, to the barn, the sunlight, the quiet safety she had found. These moments would be erased from me, and recorded for them. Ethan felt the truth of her words settle deep. You do not want that, he said. No, Leary whispered. I want to keep this. I want to keep what I felt here. The safety, the warmth. Her gaze softened. You. The single word hung between them like a fragile thread. Ethan stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough for his presence to steady her breathing. I do not want you taken back, he said. We will figure this out. She looked up at him, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes he had not seen before. Trust that was not cautious or fragile, but real. Whole. The pulse will return, she said quietly. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will keep searching. Ethan nodded, accepting the truth without flinching. Then when it comes back, we will hide you again. And if hiding is not enough, we will find a better way. Leary blinked, a slow, steady motion filled with something like awe. You speak as if you have already chosen. I have, Ethan said simply. Since the moment you stepped out of the shadows. A soft light flickered beneath her skin, the same shimmer he had noticed once before, but this time it was warmer, gentler, as if responding to something inside her rather than outside. She stepped into the beam of sunlight, letting it wash over her face. The glow beneath her skin brightened just slightly, catching the light in a way that made her look almost woven from the morning itself. Then she turned back to him, her eyes reflecting the gold of the sun and the quiet certainty of her choice. Without a word, she reached up and placed her hand against his chest, right over his heartbeat. In her people's culture, it was the highest sign of trust. Ethan covered her hand gently with his own, the barn settling around them in a hush that felt like a promise. Outside, the world stayed quiet. Inside, in the warm stillness of the barn, two very different heartbeats found the same rhythm, and for the first time, Leary's future did not feel like something to run from, but something she could stand in. Side by side with him,